Hello, ladies and gentlemen of the internet, and welcome back to the studio. On this week's installment, we will proceed with the sculpting of PT. PT started actually out as a code name that actually meant something, but now I've decided to change the name of the sculpture. So codename PT actually means nothing. But I think the new name is more appropriate. I've spoken about this before, but I think as work progresses, so does my thoughts surrounding whatever sparked the idea for the sculpture in the first place. This time it's been no different, and I felt that a different name would give more context to whoever ends up looking at the piece. So eventually I'll end up switching out the name of every single one of these PT videos, and I'll make new thumbnails and the whole 9 yards. But for now we're sticking with the PT codename until the series is finished and the final name revealed. Which will probably happen before the series is finished because the videos are lagging behind reality. I have a bunch of other commitments to take care of at the same time while I'm sculpting and making videos, and let me tell you, making YouTube videos is no joke. It's work. Even semi-decent quality videos like the ones I make is work, and so hats off to whoever makes really high quality content on YouTube and uploads regularly. It's a lot of work. Lagging behind reality actually brings me to something I wanted to talk about this episode, and that is video quality. The first portion of this video was the first footage I shot with my new camera, and I didn't know what buttons to press, which levers to pull. And so the footage is a bit meh. Halfway through the video, I seem to have learned a thing or two, however. Each episode is comprised of 3 to 4 days of model time, which is why my clothes change, and in between these days there are other days, of course, where I troubleshoot, and in this case troubleshot, what I found to be dodgy footage. But I didn't want to get rid of it altogether because without it there's obviously a huge jump between part 3 and part 4, and so my failures are here on display for all to see. So enjoy. Okay, back to sculpting. You'll see me at different points in this video blocking in the legs. I think it happens a bit early on in the video and later on as well. I'll advance the torso and stand leg further to begin with because these are the two elements that dictate my structure, my balance, and most of my gesture. So I lock these in early on in the process. This is why the head doesn't get added until later. One reason is because I don't know where it's going to be located. And another reason, which is connected to the first reason, is that I have nothing solid to connect it to. The balance leg and the arms I feel very much the same way about. While they are important, obviously the head's important too, by the way, most people need heads. And the arms are especially important in this sculpture. They play a big part. They are not structurally important, and I cannot add them until everything of structural significance is placed and solid. I build my legs up very slowly because there's a lot of movement in the contour in them, yet there is not a lot of room to maneuver because they're narrow. Obviously the body is wider than the legs. And the same thing goes for the arms, except here there are even less room to maneuver, and the hands have even less again, and they all have a lot of movement in contour. So whenever I deal with narrow areas with a lot of movement in contour, I tread carefully. It has actually helped me out a lot to do reclining figures, because when looking into someone's leg, meaning from the bottom or from the top, versus looking straight at it like we normally do, you'll discover how the contour twists and turns up and down the leg. This helps you predict the movement of the contour better. Even though it's hard to see said movement when looking straight at someone's leg, like I am in this sculpture, I already have insight and know fairly well where the contour needs to travel. Stepping close to your model and looking down their leg from above can begin to achieve the same thing, though I would be very careful to ask my model before getting too close. This week's episode is an episode of transition, as I make the transition from block-in to modeling. In the beginning here we are still dealing with the block-in, but soon I'll make the move to the modeling stage. Now there isn't a step-by-step guide you can follow for good results. There will always be back and forth, and even though I'm beginning to model, there ends up being things that still have to move around or be redrawn. Hopefully, there's not a lot that needs to be moved around, and whatever moving there is doesn't need to cover large distances. Redrawing, however, is anticipated because the big gaps in between all my forms doesn't allow me to do the accurate specific drawing I'm looking for as an end result. This is like trying to draw something over 2 pieces of paper, and the pieces of paper are not close to each other. It's impossible, it can't be done. But it gives me the flexibility to block my entire figure in, so I can visually compare model to sculpture easily, and yet retain the ability to move things around as they need to and as I see fit. It's not exactly a bulletproof technique, but it has helped me out a lot. We talked a lot about these techniques in earlier episodes. This episode is more about how to progress your sculpture from this step onwards. You're fairly sure at this point of your overall proportions, your gesture, your structure, your internal information is organized well, and what do you do now? Well, we need to fill the space in between all our forms up, of course. However, it's not as simple as it seems. There's a lot of pitfalls, and it's important that we hold on to whatever it was that we spent the last 30 hours setting up. We can add a lot of clay fast, but the problem that will present itself then is that we will lose what was already there, what we spent 30 hours setting up. And in my pretty limited teaching career, pretty short teaching career, I have seen that this is a big difficulty for people. It's very difficult for people to hold on to what they've already established. And so how do you do that? How do you hold on to what you've already established so well? My tip is to go very slow. Even though in the video here it seems that I'm going very fast, the video is sped up. Otherwise you'd be sitting here for about 9 hours, and I don't know if I can fill now 9 hours with talk. But just know that it's obviously sped up and I'm going pretty slow. By filling the spaces slowly, you'll begin to present yourself with a canvas where you can redraw the shapes already established. There is this contradiction in the way that I sculpt, I think in sculpture in general actually, in where the closer your sculpture gets to looking like your model, the differences between model and sculpture becomes more apparent. But it's too late to fix said differences because your sculpture will likely have progressed to the point where returning to fix the issues discovered is very difficult. As you practice and improve, you'll be able to better predict what issues may arise and remedy them before they even appear. You'll be able to see the things that need to happen to your sculpture before it's too late, and you've moved on beyond making them happen. I would hear this a lot from my teachers, and then I would counter it with, they would say, you've progressed too far, you've locked this in, and I would counter that argument with, I can do it, I can fix it, and then I would go and try and fix it. And usually I would make quite a mess of it, and sometimes I'd be able to fix whatever it was, and sometimes I wasn't able to fix it. The problem is that it's an unreliable way to go about things. Some things you won't be able to fix, and some things will be a major pain in the ass to fix. Reducing the natural frustration that comes with attempting something as hard as sculpture, I think, is vital to one's mental health. Not like you're going to go crazy and lose your mind if you become very frustrated with your sculpture, but you might drive the people around you crazy, which is bad enough. And drive enough people crazy and you'll end up alone, and alone you will become crazy because you won't have any people around you to help you realize where you've strayed from the path. Okay, we veered off course there a little bit, it seems. Let's try to get back on track. Being able to avoid going too far, locking your mistakes in, that's what we were talking about. This technique of the way that I block things in is definitely a part of that. A lot of things can be up there without being completely locked in and secure, as long as you're willing to edit the things that need to be edited, of course. Let's say all is good, no more editing required, every form is in its proper place. I know that many forms doesn't have their final shape yet, but as I mentioned, that will get sorted once the transition in between the forms are closer to the surface and I have my canvas. And so I begin to fill in the transition areas with clay, slowly, paying very close attention to the fact that I don't grow or change the forms themselves. I don't want to add clay in a fashion that swells the borders of the forms closer to each other. I want to create a new plane, a plane of the transition, which my area of rest, we've talked about that before also, the areas of rest, that needs to exist in between each and every form. These areas have their own shapes, and I'm beginning to discover this as I fill up the gaps. But just like with widths, and just like with the forms themselves, I take care not to dive in head first. I start off by dipping my pinky toe into the water, then a couple of more toes, then the whole foot. You get the picture. A big mistake is to not respect the work already done. If I swell my forms so they grow closer and closer to each other, I will lose whatever drawing I did while setting them up. The shapes will quickly stop resembling those I observed on my model. And before I know it, my sculpture stops resembling my model altogether, and I made my life incredibly difficult. Now I have to retrace my steps and dig my sculpture out of the mass of clay I've created. Often enough, the sculpture will either end up looking fat, not resembling our model's body type at all, or, and this is perhaps even worse, it will end up looking tense and strained, resembling someone who is severely constipated and trying their hardest to pass a stool, which is not a very attractive way to look. Unless that's what you're going for, of course. At the end of the day, it's all about intent, and this is all about being in control of your final vision. One step you'll see me take every now and then is redrawing my center line. And this is about holding on to what you've already set up. I can't lose my center line because without it, I won't know what's center. And that, of course, is a problem as the sculpture is still flexible and things are changing and morphing and moving around. And if I have nothing to anchor those edits and changes to, I get in trouble very fast. And so will you. On the technical aspects of this step, there is something to be said about the clay and the tools I use to accomplish this task. The clay of my block-in has been allowed to harden somewhat. The surface is not going to move very easily on me, and this is a good thing. It means that what I established to be true will remain where I put it unless I put in some effort to move it around. The new clay that I add is pretty fresh, and it squishes into and around the older clay easily without disturbing the older, drier clay. Actually, I think this is a great tip, and one that can only be thoroughly understood by using whatever clay you're going to be using a lot. Every clay is different, and there is really nothing I can do to teach you how to control your clay. But it is helpful once you know how to control it, for sure. With my particular clay, I can let it harden until it's close to a soft leather finish, kind of. The fresh clay is essentially just fresh clay straight out of the bag. I don't water it down or anything like that. But I have heard of people blocking things in the same way, more or less, as me, and then taking wet clay, using a brush to paint it on the figure, and do their transition that way. So, the possibilities are endless. Don't be afraid to give something new a shot. You never know what you'll discover. The tools I use to accomplish the task of filling in the gaps is a rake tool, perhaps a couple of different size rake tools actually, and a wooden modeling tool. The rake tools are Sculpture House tools, bought in America. I don't know if you can get them in Europe, but Google Sculpture House tools and you'll probably find them. I use the ones that have teeth, and I sand the teeth down a little bit. There are ones that are wire wrapped, but I don't like those as much. And the modeling tool is just a wooden Tiranti modeling tool. You can kind of see the shape of it here, or you can look up my tool video where I show it more. I apply the clay with the modeling tool, and to take the applied clay from very messy to somewhat more refined, I use the rake tools. Very important to mention here that the rake tools tends to be overused, and once overused, they tend to flatten things out a lot, which is not very desirable. Flat sculpture is not attractive, and not what we're after, unless you're making reliefs, which I assume you're not, if you're watching this video. But rake tools can very quickly turn things organic, and they hide a lot of crimes, so they definitely have their uses. I just wouldn't use one at the end, as I mentioned, because it flattened things out too much for me. And we want sculpture that are volumetric and voluminous. At the end of the day, the only thing we have as sculptors is space, so we want to use as much of it as possible. This seems to be a good time to mention Patreon. If you are interested in learning sculpture from me personally and get feedback on your work either on email or via video chat, my Patreon page is the place for you. You'll get in-depth feedback on techniques and how you can apply them to your own work. Anything sculpture related goes. We can talk about armature, supplies, mold making, anything you need help with in your sculpting endeavors. You'll also get 25% off on my web store, plus accumulated credits equal to the amount you pledge that can be used for further discounts. So check it out, there's a link in the description below. While I model, I also adjust the shapes of the forms already established to make them more accurate, and I also start turning the forms a little bit by adding volume. Again, we come back to this talking point of not allowing things to get out of control and losing what we've spent time setting up. Volume should not be added in a way that violates the contours or the shapes of the form you've established. These are things we've worked hard to establish, and we don't want to lose them in fear of turning our sculpture into someone vastly different from our model. Whatever it is that you're going to end up changing, you want to make sure that you're in control of changing them. So again, that's not letting things get out of control. So when we add volume, to avoid changing things that we don't want to change, making sure that we only do the things that we are trying to do, we add volume while respecting our contours and the shapes of our forms. Essentially treating the contours and the shapes of our forms as elder citizens who do deserve your respect. So give it to them. That's it for today, guys and gals. We'll speak a lot more about modeling in these next episode, I imagine. There's still a ways to go for the modeling to appear as convincing as I'd like it to be, but we'll get there eventually. Now, if you're like me and you can't wait for anything and you want up-to-the-minute updates on the sculpture, you can head over to my Instagram or Facebook pages. There are links below in the description. Or if you prefer to savor the sensation of watching me sculpt this monstrosity one piece of clay at a time, then hold off on the social media and keep an eye out here on the channel. By hitting the little bell next to the subscribe button, you'll be notified whenever a new video comes out so you don't miss it. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, I encourage you to check out my Patreon page. I give feedback and critiques on people's work, and we talk about whatever you need help with in your sculpting endeavors. There are several rewards, one of them being the maquette for this very sculpture. So check it out, there's a link in the description below. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for a new video next Thursday. Subscribe and hit the bell to be notified whenever a new video comes out. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button and share with your friends and family. It really helps me out a lot. Thank you for watching, stay creative, and I hope to see you in the next one.